The chandelier above the oceanside resort ballroom glittered like a sky full of captive stars. Gold light washed across crystal flutes and polished marble, reflecting the elegance of a night designed for power, couples donors, and whispers of multi-million-dollar deals. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, a champagne flute in hand, watching as the world I had built over 11 years unraveled in the rhythm of a tango. Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. There he was, James, my husband, my law school sweetheart, my partner at least in theory. His custom-tailored tuxedo hugged his frame as though stitched by destiny itself. Every turn of his body, every practiced flick of his wrist guided Victoria Bennett across the parquet with flawless confidence. She leaned into him, auburn hair brushing against his cheek, crimson silk gown rippling with every step. They moved as if the music belonged only to them. The guests noticed. Of course they did. Some raised eyebrows with polite disapproval, others exchanged knowing glances. And yet no one intervened, because in this room appearances mattered more than truth. I sipped the champagne, the bubbles sharp against my tongue, and felt the familiar tightening in my chest, not jealousy, not anymore, but the clarity of finality. I had been waiting for this exact moment, sculpting my composure like marble, rehearsing the lines I would never say aloud. They make quite the pair, don't they? The voice sliced through my thoughts. Diane Murphy, wife of James's law partner, materialized beside me, martini in hand, a smile that wasn't quite friendly, curving her lips. She was fishing testing, hoping for a crack in my mask. Yes, I said smoothly, not a tremor in my tone. James has always appreciated a beautiful dance partner. Her eyes flicked across my face, searching for heartbreak fury, anything she could savor later as gossip. She found nothing. And that unsettled her more than tears ever could. She downed her martini and drifted away disappointed. I remained a lone statue amid the swell of music and laughter, watching as James's hand slipped lower on Victoria's back as his eyes lingered too long on her painted smile. Once years ago, those eyes had lingered on me with the same hunger. Once I would have felt the sting of betrayal like fire under my skin. But betrayal loses its shock when it repeats often enough. Tonight I felt only calm. I crossed the floor slowly, deliberately, heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. The crowd shifted as I approached, a ripple of anticipation passing through them. James noticed first. His confident smile faltered, then snapped back into place. Victoria turned her expression caught between apology and triumph. Catherine James said, his voice steady, but his grip tightening on her waist. "We were just discussing zoning implications for the Westlake development." With such passion, I replied evenly, "It must be fascinating subject matter." A few polite chuckles rose nearby. Victoria flushed but didn't loosen her grip. "James has been an incredible mentor," she said, voice dripping with false modesty. "I'm sure you've learned plenty," I answered, sliding my clutch open. My fingers closed around the cool band of platinum that had once symbolized love, loyalty, forever. I placed it on a cocktail table beside us. The ring hit the glass with a sound impossibly sharp, slicing through the music, the chatter, the very air. Heads turned. "Keep dancing with her, James," I said quietly, my eyes never leaving his. "You won't even notice I'm gone." For the first time in years, he looked truly unsettled. The mask slipped confusion, anger, maybe even fear before he steadied himself. "Don't be dramatic. We'll discuss this at home." "No," I replied, my voice calm, final, unshakable. "We won't." I turned, leaving him in mid-step, leaving the gasps and whispers swirling behind me. The orchestra played on, oblivious, the tango reaching its crescendo, as I walked out of the life I had performed in for far too long. My heels clicked against the marble like punctuation marks, each step sealing the decision I had already made months ago. Tonight wasn't impulse. Tonight was execution. Behind me I could feel James disentangling himself, muttering excuses to Victoria preparing to follow, but he wouldn't catch me. By the time he reached the east entrance, Marcus's car would already be waiting. My exit had been rehearsed down to the minute. As I reached the grand doors, I paused, not to look back, but to breathe in the sweet final taste of liberation. For the first time in 11 years, the weight on my chest eased. I wasn't leaving a marriage tonight. I was reclaiming myself. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a heavy thud muffling the music and chatter. But my escape had not begun tonight. It had been set in motion half a year earlier, every detail rehearsed with the precision of a military operation. 6 months ago, I was still the perfect attorney's wife. I smiled at firm dinners, hosted charity luncheons, and pretended not to notice the way James's eyes wandered or how his phone lit up with late-night messages from clients. But behind the scenes, I was already laying the foundation for freedom. It started small. A single notebook hidden inside the false bottom of my design portfolio. I called it my ledger of truth. Each page cataloged discrepancies I found in James's financial behavior statements that didn't match sudden withdrawals, unexplained purchases. I photographed everything, uploading copies to a secure cloud account Marcus had built for me. Not even James's best investigator could crack it. Marcus. He was the only person I trusted with my secret. We'd met in college long before law school drew me into James's orbit. He had weathered his own storm of marriage that ended when his husband siphoned their joint assets and left him nearly ruined. Marcus had rebuilt his life through cybersecurity work, and he understood betrayal in a way no one else could. When I whispered that I needed a plan to disappear, he didn't laugh. He nodded. "You'll need 3 things," he said that night over coffee in his San Diego loft. "Resources, documentation, and timing. Without those, you're not escaping, you're just running." So we built all 3. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. First, resources. I began transferring small amounts of money into an account James never monitored, a modest nest egg I justified as business expenses for my design firm. Over 6 months, the trickle grew into a reservoir. At the same time, Marcus helped me open an offshore account under my maiden name, a legal entity shielded by international privacy laws. Every receipt, every transfer was recorded with the care of someone preparing not just for escape, but for a court battle should it come. Second, documentation. Marcus introduced me to his network, a quiet community of professionals who specialized in giving women new beginnings. Not criminals, but survivors. Through them, I acquired what I would need to become someone else. A backup driver's license tied to a legitimate but dormant identity, credit records that showed a history of responsible spending, even a resume for Elena Taylor, the name I'd chosen in honor of my grandmother. None of it was forged. All of it was crafted through loopholes, mergers, and bureaucratic blind spots. Third, timing. Leaving a man like James wasn't just about walking out the door. He had connections with law enforcement, with judges, with business partners who owed him favors. If I confronted him directly, he would paint me as unstable, maybe even dangerous. So my plan had to unfold in silence. I rehearsed it again and again. The gala would provide the perfect cover, the moment when James was most distracted, most certain of his own invincibility. There were nights I doubted myself. Nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling of our Rancho Santa Fe home, wondering if I was paranoid, if perhaps I should confront him openly instead of weaving an escape route in the shadows. But then I would hear his voice echo in memory. "Trust me." Always those 2 words delivered before another selfish decision that cost me part of my independence. And each time my resolve hardened. One evening, 3 months into my preparations, I found the mortgage papers, $750,000 leveraged against our fully paid housemaid grandmother's house. The signature beside his own looked exactly like mine, but I hadn't signed it. That was the moment fear turned into certainty. James wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was dismantling my future brick by brick. Marcus showed me how to scan the documents, upload them to the encrypted cloud, and set a dead man switch. If I didn't log in every 72 hours, the files would automatically send themselves to the California Bar Association, to James's firm partners, even to the mortgage company. Insurance, protection, proof. Piece by piece, I wove my freedom. A go bag packed with essentials rested in the trunk of Marcus's car, cash in mixed denominations clothes that wouldn't draw attention, a second phone, a laptop scrubbed of any digital fingerprints. At his apartment, another bag waited, a duplicate set. because in this new world, redundancy meant survival. By the time the gala arrived, the plan was airtight. All I had to do was act my part. One last time, the poised wife in emerald silk sipping champagne, smiling for photographs, pretending not to see the truth that had been rotting my marriage for years. Then, at the right moment, I would place my wedding ring on the table and walk out not as Catherine Elliott, the attorney's wife, but as the woman who had chosen herself. And so when I stepped into Marcus's waiting car at the east entrance of the Oceanside Resort, I wasn't running, I was executing. The man twirling Victoria Bennett across the ballroom floor thought he was in control. He thought I was blind, obedient, harmless. But what James would never understand, what he would never forgive, was that I had been preparing for this night longer than he had prepared for her. When James and I first met in the buzzing hallways of Stanford Law, we were equals in every sense of the word. Two ambitious students from modest families, hungry for success, unafraid of long nights filled with case law and caffeine. We promised each other that our partnership would be built on balance, 2 careers, 2 dreams growing side by side. For a while I believed it. Our wedding was small by San Diego standards. No celebrity guest list, no fireworks, just vows whispered in a chapel with a view of the Pacific. We laughed that day, promising we would never become the kind of couple that measured love in luxury. And yet somewhere along the way, James decided love meant winning cases, climbing firm ladders, and collecting recognition while I was left to applaud from the sidelines. The first compromise felt temporary. He needed time to establish himself at Murphy, Keller & Associates. Just a year or 2, he said. I agreed, thinking it was a small sacrifice. I found a position at a boutique design firm, something that allowed me to use my eye for aesthetics while we waited for the right moment for me to return to law. That right moment never came. Every year brought new reasons. James's first big client, his promotion to junior partner, the economic downturn that made hiring risky. Each excuse stacked like bricks until they walled off the future I had once envisioned. My design work grew slowly into its own business, yet James dismissed it with a condescending smile. My wife has her little hobby, he would say at firm dinners. Those words stung more than he ever knew, cutting deep into the identity I had surrendered piece by piece. The subtle erosion of my voice was harder to notice than a betrayal, but more dangerous. At first it was small things, letting him choose the restaurant, the car, the furniture. Later it was larger, selling my grandmother's lake house, because he said we needed liquidity, investing my inheritance into his firm's expansion. Always framed as our decisions, though, the benefits flowed almost exclusively to him. I remember one night in particular. It was our 2nd anniversary, and James had just been assigned to the Riverside Development, a massive project that could cement his place as partner. I spent the entire dinner asking questions, celebrating his achievement, making him feel like a king. Days later, when I shared that I had landed the Henderson estate renovation, the largest contract my design business had ever seen, he changed the subject within minutes. A new suit he wanted to buy, another meeting with the partners. My triumph meant nothing in comparison to his daily victories. That pattern repeated year after year until my accomplishments felt invisible even to myself. Friends drifted away. Family assumed I was thriving in my husband's shadow. Outwardly, we looked perfect, the Rancho Santa Fe home, the charity galas, the vacations on borrowed client yachts. Inwardly, I was shrinking, becoming little more than a curated accessory, a reflection of James's success. The worst part was how natural it began to feel. Like the proverbial frog in slowly boiling water, I didn't recognize how dangerous it had become until it was too late. I adjusted, smiled, told myself this was what marriage looked like. My needs could wait, my dreams could bend, my voice could soften. But deep down, resentment brewed. Quiet at first, then louder with each dismissive comment, each overlooked achievement, each, "Trust me," whispered, before he bulldozed another boundary. By the time I discovered his affair with Victoria, the wound of betrayal was almost secondary. The real loss had happened years earlier in the gradual erasure of who I was. Looking back, I realize I had already started mourning my marriage long before the crimson gown brushed against his tuxedo on that ballroom floor. The affair wasn't the spark that burned it down. It was merely the final match, tossed onto a pile of broken promises. For 11 years, I had played the part of the dutiful wife. Tonight, as I slipped further into the plan I had crafted in secret, I vowed never to let myself become invisible again. The discovery came on a Tuesday evening in the quiet of James's home office, where mahogany shelves groaned under the weight of legal tomes. I wasn't snooping, at least that's what I told myself. I had gone in to find a spare charger, but the moment I opened the drawer of his desk, the sharp scent of paper and ink met me like a warning. Inside, stacked too neatly to be accidental, were documents stamped with the mortgage company's insignia. At first I thought it was a mistake. Our home had been purchased outright, paid for with my grandmother's inheritance. The lake house we sold, the house that once held summers of laughter, had funded the dream of Rancho Santa Fe. No mortgage, no debt. That was the promise. But the papers told another story. $750,000, secured against our home, my signature at the bottom flowing across the page in perfect mimicry, except I had never touched that pen. My breath caught as the truth crystallized. James hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he had stolen my foundation. The house wasn't a sanctuary anymore, it was collateral. I photographed every page, my hands trembling only once before I steadied them. Marcus's voice echoed in my memory, "Documentation is survival." Within minutes, the files were uploaded to the secure cloud, filed under a folder labeled simply "Insurance." That night when I confronted James, he dismissed it with that same infuriating calm he always wielded. "It's a temporary liquidity solution," he said smoothly, loosening his tie as though the matter were trivial. "Liquidity," I repeated. "You forged my signature. It's for the Westlake project. The returns will be spectacular. Trust me." Those two words, "trust me," a phrase that had once been a vow, now sounded like a curse. It wasn't just the house. Piece by piece, I uncovered the trail joint investment accounts, quietly drained retirement funds, borrowed for business ventures that never materialized, jewelry purchases billed to our shared card, though I had never received them. The final insult came in the form of hotel receipts from Las Vegas, dated the same weekend James swore he was in Phoenix for a partner's retreat. The charges were for a sweet champagne service and an upscale jeweler conveniently located in the lobby. I didn't need to guess who had worn the necklace I later saw gleaming on Victoria's collarbone at the firm's dinner. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had a paper trail, a map of theft and infidelity that showed me exactly where James's loyalty ended at the intersection of greed and desire. Marcus helped me organize the evidence, creating a timeline so precise it could withstand any courtroom scrutiny. "You're not just leaving him," Marcus said grimly one night as we scrolled through the files. "You're protecting yourself from financial ruin." He was right. If I had confronted James too soon, if I had demanded divorce without preparation, I would have been blindsided. He would have used his firm's resources to discredit me, painted me as unstable, erased my contributions with the stroke of a pen. But with the documentation in place, I held the weapon he never expected, truth carved into ledgers and contracts. Every late night he claimed was spent at the office. Every emergency meeting that pulled him away from family dinners was accounted for in numbers and receipts. I could map his betrayal like a cartographer charts coastlines, and in doing so, I charted my own path out. The more I uncovered, the colder my resolve became. Once I had cried over the possibility of another woman. Now I only felt clarity. Victoria wasn't the problem. She was a symptom. The real disease was James's hunger for wealth, for power, for validation at any cost, and I was simply collateral damage. By the time I closed the last folder and stored the evidence in the encrypted account, I knew there was no turning back. Love might forgive an indiscretion. Trust might survive a lapse in judgment, but this was theft, deception, and betrayal so systematic it could never be accidental. The Westlake development wasn't just another project. It was the sinkhole into which James had poured our life, our home, our future. And he had done it with the arrogance of a man certain his wife would never notice. But I had noticed, and soon the entire world would know. The night I finally left wasn't stormy or cinematic. No thunder, no lightning. Just an ordinary Tuesday evening in San Diego, the kind where neighbors watered their lawns and teenagers skateboarded past cul-de-sacs. Yet in my chest, a storm raged louder than any summer monsoon. Marcus pulled up in a nondescript silver sedan, not his usual BMW, but a rental with plates that would draw no attention. He killed the headlights halfway down the block, coasting to a stop under the cover of a jacaranda tree. I stood at the upstairs window suitcase at my feet, watching his silhouette. My palms were damp, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times. What to pack, what to leave, how to erase digital traces. Still, when the time came, my legs felt like stone. 11 years of routine, setting the alarm, folding laundry, waiting for James's key in the lock, anchored me to the floor. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 9. James was still at the office, or so he claimed. I knew better. Victoria's high-rise condo had become his second home. That gave me a 2-hour window, maybe less if guilt or paranoia drove him back early. I forced my body to move. One suitcase, only essentials documents, cash Marcus had urged me to withdraw in small increments over the past 6 months. Anything more would raise suspicion. The rest clothes jewelry photos would become artifacts of a life I was shedding. When I finally opened the front door, the night air hit me like freedom. Marcus was already out of the car, his expression tight, scanning the street as if we were fugitives. Maybe we were. "You ready?" he whispered. I nodded, though my throat refused sound. We loaded the suitcase into the trunk. My hands trembled as I slid into the passenger seat. Every sound seemed magnified, the click of the door, the crunch of gravel, the low hum of the engine. I half expected the neighbors to peer out their windows to call out to ask why James's wife was leaving with another man at night. Marcus handed me a second phone, a burner with nothing but his number, and one pre-programmed contact labeled E. Turn yours off. Now. I hesitated, staring at the familiar glow of my iPhone. Photos of my parents, my business contacts, years of messages, all of it tethered me to the past. Then I powered it down. The screen went black, and with it the identity I had carried for over a decade. We drove in silence at first. The city lights blurred into ribbons as we merged onto the freeway. I watched the skyline shrink in the rearview mirror, each glowing tower, a reminder of dinner's galas and lies. My chest tightened, not with regret, but with the eerie calm of inevitability. "Remember," Marcus said finally, his hand steady on the wheel. "No calls to anyone from your old life, not your family, not your friends. If you want this clean, you vanish. Completely." "I know," I whispered, but knowing and feeling were different. The ache of goodbye pressed against my ribs. We stopped at a gas station outside Riverside where the sodium lights buzzed like insects. Marcus popped the trunk, revealing a second bag, new clothes, hair dye, sunglasses, a passport under a new name. Elena, the name I would become. "You'll stay at a safe place for a few days," Marcus explained. "After that, E will take over. Trust her system." As I pulled on the hoodie from the bag, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, lips pale, shoulders tense. I didn't look like Catherine anymore. I looked like someone caught between lives. Back in the car, Marcus glanced at me. "This is the hardest night. After this, every mile gets easier." I wanted to believe him. But when my old phone vibrated faintly in my purse, one last notification before the battery died, I almost reached for it. A ghost of James's voice, perhaps, or a friend wondering where I was. I forced myself to ignore it. With one decisive motion, I left the phone in the gas station trash bin. As we pulled back onto the highway, I felt lighter, though my stomach churned. Behind me lay a life built on betrayal. Ahead, uncertainty. But in that fragile silence, with the hum of the tires and the steady presence of Marcus beside me, I knew one thing for certain: I was free. The safe house didn't look like the kind of place where lives were rebuilt. From the outside, it was a dull stucco bungalow tucked behind a hardware store in Riverside. But once the heavy steel door closed behind me, I realized appearances were the first lesson in survival. Nothing about this place drew attention, and that was precisely the point. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and bleach. A single lamp cast warm light across the living room, where mismatched furniture created an almost homey chaos. A woman in her late 40s emerged from the kitchen. Her dark hair was tied back, her eyes sharp and knowing. "I'm E," she said simply, as if that single letter contained entire lifetimes. "Marcus told me you're ready." Ready. The word felt heavier than the suitcase still in my grip. I wasn't sure if anyone could ever be ready to erase themselves, but I followed her into the back room where a vanity mirror had been set up surrounded by bottles, scissors, and makeup palettes. E didn't waste time. "First, your hair." She studied me with the precision of an artist. Dark chestnut to honey blonde. "It'll be obvious at first, but by the time it settles, you'll be someone else." I thought of James's dismissive smirk, how he once joked I looked too serious with my natural hair. My throat tightened, but I nodded. Each snip of the scissors was like severing a tether. An hour later, a stranger stared back at me. Lighter hair, fresh layers framing my face, foundation softening years of exhaustion. E tilted my chin, inspecting her work. Not Catherine anymore. Elena. The name rolled through my mind like an incantation. Elena. A name unburdened by James's shadow, unmarked by his fraud. For the first time in years, my reflection didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like a possibility, but looks were only the surface. E slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents so pristine they could pass any casual inspection driver's license credit card, even a social security number linked to a fabricated work history. "Marcus prepped the skeleton," E explained. "I built the flesh. Use these sparingly. No flashing big purchases, no sudden job changes. You blend. You exist without existing." I traced the name on the driver's license with my thumb. Elena Taylor, age 36, occupation freelance consultant. I wondered who she was supposed to be. Then I realized the truth: she was me, if I had been given a second chance. Over the next 3 days, E drilled me on everything from digital hygiene to street-level awareness. Never use your real birthday on forms. Rotate cafes when you work on public Wi-Fi. Always check reflections in windows to see if you're being followed. It was exhausting, like studying for the hardest exam of my life. But each lesson hardened something inside me. I wasn't just fleeing anymore, I was preparing. One evening, E handed me a plain key on a chain. "This opens a storage unit in Anaheim. Inside is a safe with enough cash to carry you through 6 months. You'll also find a set of passports for emergencies." "Why help me?" I asked, unable to silence the question that had lingered since Marcus introduced us. E's gaze softened, though her voice stayed firm. "Because I was once you. Different husband, different city, same story. No one deserves to live invisible." Her words sank deep. For years, I had thought my invisibility was my shame, but in this hidden network, invisibility was transformed into power, a shield, rather than a prison. On the 4th night, Marcus returned to check in. When he saw me, his eyes flickered with surprise. If James walked past you on the street, he wouldn't even pause. The compliments settled over me like armor. For the first time since the gala, I felt a flicker of safety. Before leaving, Marcus pressed a card into my hand. "Keep this number memorized, then burn it. If everything goes wrong, call. Otherwise, disappear." That night, lying on the safe house cot, I whispered my new name into the dark. Elena. It felt fragile, like a secret I had to protect. But it was mine. And with it came the promise of a future that James could never touch. The first morning I walked into the cafe on Anaheim Boulevard, I felt like a child learning to balance on a bicycle, wobbly, terrified, but oddly exhilarated. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon pastries. The chatter of students, freelancers, and retirees formed a symphony of ordinary life. For years I had been trapped in galas and fundraisers, where every laugh was calculated, every glance a transaction. Here people were just people. As Elena Taylor, I carried nothing more than a laptop, a burner phone, and a resume Marcus had carefully crafted. My consulting work was vague by design, enough to explain hours on the computer invoices and modest deposits, but not detailed enough to invite scrutiny. The truth was simpler. I wrote interior design proposals, tapped into online freelance networks, and sold digital sketches under a pseudonym. The cafe became my office. The manager, a cheerful woman named Rosa, didn't ask questions when I paid in cash the first few weeks. She only smiled, sliding an extra croissant onto my plate. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said once, and I nearly cried from the kindness. Slowly I built a rhythm. Mornings were for freelance projects, afternoons for walks through neighborhoods where no one recognized me. I learned to blend in shopping at small markets using prepaid cards, never repeating routines too exactly. At night I journaled. Not as Catherine, the erased wife, but as Elena, the woman learning how to breathe again. Then came the turning point. A local nonprofit was seeking volunteers for a community design project, revamping a women's shelter in Santa Ana. I hesitated. Exposure meant risk, but something in me longed to contribute to feel useful beyond survival. The first day at the shelter, I wore oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap, my nerves buzzing. Yet no one questioned my presence. Instead, they handed me paintbrushes, fabric swatches, and tape measures. For hours, I worked alongside strangers who laughed easily, who carried their own scars, yet found joy in building something new. That's where I met Clara, a retired teacher with a voice that carried wisdom and warmth. She noticed my careful silence and said gently, "You don't have to tell your story. Just know you're safe here." Safe. The word wrapped around me like a blanket. Week by week I returned. We painted walls in bright colors, built reading corners, stitched curtains. The shelter transformed, but so did I. These women, many of them survivors of abuse and betrayal, didn't need explanations to understand me. They read the quiet in my eyes, the hesitation in my hands, and instead of pressing for details, they offered acceptance. One evening, as we stood admiring the nearly finished common room, Clara touched my shoulder. "You've got a gift. The way you arrange space, it makes people feel hope again." Her words pierced something inside me. For 11 years, James had belittled my design work, calling it a hobby. Here, strangers saw it as healing. For the first time, my skills weren't diminished, they were valued. I began earning small commissions, neighbors asking for help, redecorating the shelter, recommending me to friends. Nothing extravagant, but enough to cover rent for the modest apartment E helped me secure. Each paycheck was proof that I could survive without James, without his name, without the gilded cage he built around me. Yet it wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. Every time a client thanked me, every time I saw someone smile in a space I had shaped, I stitched together a piece of myself that James had tried to erase. Still, there were nights when fear crept in, when I imagined James uncovering my trail, when I worried one misstep would unravel the fragile identity I'd built. But then I'd remember Rosa's extra croissant, Clara's steady encouragement, the laughter of women who had survived worse and still found reasons to smile. And I realized hope wasn't something grand. It was a series of small mercies collected day by day. As I lay on my narrow bed that night, I whispered into the quiet, "Elena is real." For the first time, I almost believed it. News has a way of finding you even when you've done everything possible to disappear. I was in the shelter's common room one afternoon rearranging chairs after a workshop when Clara walked in with her tablet. Her expression carried both pity and curiosity. "Elena," she said softly, "you might want to see this." On the screen was James's face, my husband's face plastered, across a local news broadcast. The caption read, "Prominent attorney under fire. Allegations of fraud surface amid wife's mysterious disappearance." My heart stuttered. I pressed play. James looked perfectly composed. His salt and pepper hair styled his tailored suit unwrinkled. To the untrained eye, he was a grieving husband fighting to clear his name. His voice trembled at all the right moments as he told reporters, "I only want Catherine to come home safely. She's been under immense stress, and I fear someone may have taken advantage of her fragile state." Fragile. The word hit me like ice water. He wasn't just pleading innocence. He was crafting a narrative where I was unstable, confused, perhaps even complicit in my own disappearance, exactly as Marcus had warned. but then the broadcast shifted. An investigative journalist laid out details that undercut James's performance. A secret mortgage on our home, discrepancies in client accounts, whispers of embezzlement. A financial storm was brewing, and James was at the center of it. Within days, more outlets picked up the story. Headlines screamed, "Missing wife, missing millions, and law firm under scrutiny after partner's exit." For the first time, James was not controlling the narrative. The mask of the polished attorney began to crack. Still, I knew better than to celebrate too soon. James was dangerous when cornered, and sure enough, less than a week later, Marcus sent me a secure message. "He's suing you in absentia." I froze, rereading the words. James had filed civil motions claiming I had stolen assets, that I was hiding money to sabotage him. He presented himself as the victim of an unfaithful, unstable wife who had vanished with funds that rightfully belonged to him. It was a calculated move. By dragging me into court even without my presence, he could control the narrative and possibly seize the assets I had fought so carefully to protect. But what James didn't know was that I had already documented everything. The forged signatures on the mortgage papers, the hidden accounts where he funneled firm money, the jewelry receipts for Victoria. Copies of them all sat safely in encrypted cloud storage, ready for release at the right moment. Marcus and I discussed the timing over a secure line. "We need to let him walk into his own trap," Marcus advised. "The more aggressively he pushes this lawsuit, the more contradictions will surface. And when the investigators dig deeper, they'll see who was really siphoning money." And so I waited. From my small apartment, I watched James's downfall unfold in real time, each news cycle peeling away another layer of his polished facade. Victoria appeared at his side in some interviews, her diamond ring glinting under camera lights. To the public, she was the supportive partner. To me, she was proof of his arrogance, flaunting their affair before my body was even declared missing. Then came the moment of quiet vindication. A court document leaked to the press. Forensic accountants had traced embezzled client funds directly to accounts tied to James's new venture. His credibility collapsed overnight. Commentators who once praised his legal brilliance now dissected his deceit. The lawsuit against me began to look less like a victim's plea and more like a smokescreen. I should have felt triumph, but what I felt was clarity. James's downfall wasn't my revenge. It was his own making. All I had done was step out of the way and let his greed, his arrogance, and his need for control bury him. That night, as I sipped tea by the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass, I realized the true power of my escape. By leaving, I hadn't just freed myself from James's grip. I had forced him to fight alone without the wife he had once used as his shield. And without me, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The closer James came to exposure, the more desperate his moves became. For weeks I had been one step ahead, thanks to Marcus, thanks to months of planning, thanks to my decision to vanish before James could discard me. But desperation makes men reckless, and James Elliott was no exception. It started with a warning. Marlene appeared at my safe house one morning, her face grim. "They've increased the reward," she said, sliding a newspaper across the table. The headline made my stomach tighten. $100,000 offered for information on missing wife. My face. Catherine's face stared back at me from the page. Blonde hair, hazel eyes, new life or not, the risk of recognition was now doubled. Money like that made even neighbors dangerous. "Pressure is rising," Marlene added. "The lawsuit didn't land the way he wanted, and the fraud investigation is closing in. He'll use every resource he has left to drag you back. Drag me back." The words burned. James wasn't looking for his wife. He was looking for control. And for the first time, fear broke through my calm exterior. If his allies connected Marcus, if they tracked Marlene's network, the walls could close in fast. We accelerated the plan. Instead of lying low until the storm passed, I would move. Not west, not south, east, toward the very city James had chosen as his kingdom, New York. It was bold, maybe even reckless. But in my gut, I knew it was the only way to stay free. If James was the hunter, the best place to disappear was in plain sight, hidden in the chaos of the city he thought he owned. The final preparations came quickly. New documents, cash in mixed bills, a nondescript suitcase with only essentials. Elena Taylor would step off a transport flight into New York as if she'd always belonged there. Meanwhile, Catherine Elliott would become a ghost, fading deeper into speculation and conspiracy theories. The last night before departure, I barely slept. Images of James haunted me, not the man I once loved, but the one I had come to know too well. His sharp smile at the gala, his voice spinning lies for the cameras, his arrogance in believing no one could outwit him. And yet he had underestimated me. At dawn, Marlene drove me to the extraction point, a small airstrip used for medical transport. To the world, I was a patient being transferred to a rehabilitation center in Pennsylvania. In reality, I was leaving behind the last remnants of my old life. As the plane lifted the desert shrinking below, I felt an ache in my chest. Not grief, never that. It was the weight of years falling away, the sudden realization that I had truly severed every tie. There was no going back. Not to San Diego, not to Rancho Santa Fe, not to the woman who had once waited at home while her husband danced with someone else. Hours later, New York rose on the horizon, glittering and vast. My heart pounded as the skyline sharpened through the window. Somewhere in those towers, James and Victoria were planning their empire, convinced they were untouchable. But they didn't know Elena Taylor was already here, already carving out a life independent of their shadows. Freedom didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came with small, deliberate steps, walking into my leased apartment in Brooklyn Heights, unpacking my modest suitcase, opening a laptop under a new name, and sending my first email as a professional consultant. No one looked twice. No one saw a missing woman. They saw Elena, confident, competent, anonymous. That night, as I stood on the promenade overlooking Manhattan, I whispered the truth into the cool wind. I am free. Not because James had fallen, not because his empire was collapsing, but because I had chosen myself. For the first time in 11 years, my reflection in the glass wasn't a stranger. It was me, whole, unbroken, and finally alive. A single year can remake an entire life. Standing by the window of my Brooklyn Heights apartment, I watched the autumn sunlight filter through thin curtains glowing across the warm, minimal space I had designed myself. It was peaceful, functional, alive, and I realized Elena Taylor was no longer just an alias. She was me. That morning, the headline flashed across my laptop screen: James Elliott, sentenced to 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. I read the article slowly, my pulse steady. No anger, no satisfaction, just clarity. The man who had once controlled every corner of my life had finally destroyed himself. He didn't need my revenge. His arrogance and greed had written his downfall long before I left. The early months in New York were hard. I had to learn how to be Elena, not Catherine, the obedient attorney's wife. Elena spoke directly without shrinking. She walked into boardrooms with ease, not apology, and she didn't hide her intelligence behind polite smiles. With Dr. Misrai's coaching, I shed old habits one by one: the perfect posture, the deferential tone, the constant readiness to please. Now, when I entered a room, people saw a sharp, confident consultant, not a missing woman. Clients came quickly: a publishing house in crisis, a financial firm restructuring, even a law office recovering from a messy merger. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was building a career on the very type of work James once claimed as his domain. Except this time, it was my name on the contract, my expertise, my success. One afternoon, sitting in a cafe with Diane, a colleague turned friend, she casually brought up that strange case of a lawyer's wife who vanished out in California. I stirred my coffee and smiled faintly. Catherine Elliott lived only in police files and half-forgotten podcasts now. No one at that table, no one in New York looked at me and saw her, and that was exactly how it needed to be. Sometimes Marcus's encrypted messages still came through our old code, a donation receipt, signaling he was safe. They reminded me of the risks I'd taken, of the man I once trusted too much. But I no longer lived waiting for the past to knock on my door. I lived forward. At night, I often walked along the promenade Manhattan, glittering across the East River. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't a shadow. I was a free woman with work I loved, friendships that mattered, and a future I chose myself. If anyone asked, I'd say I didn't disappear. I stopped existing in his story and finally started writing my own. A story not about betrayal, but about rebirth. When I left that wedding ring on the cocktail table a year ago, I thought I had lost everything. In truth, that was the exact moment I found myself again. The morning light poured into my Brooklyn Heights apartment, spilling across the dining table where my laptop sat open. I had been skimming client emails when the headline appeared on my newsfeed: former California attorney James Elliott, sentenced to 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. My breath caught for a moment, not from fear, not from grief, but from the strange, quiet recognition that justice had finally caught up to the man who once believed himself untouchable. I clicked the article, scanning the details I already suspected. James had pled guilty to multiple counts of client fund misappropriation fraud and tax evasion. What could have been a 15-year sentence had been reduced to 5 through a plea deal with the possibility of parole after 30 months. Typical James, even in disgrace, he negotiated, angled, and bargained. Still, he couldn't bargain his way out of prison bars. The piece included a photo of him leaving the courthouse, slimmer, grayer, yet still clinging to that practiced expression of composure. To the untrained eye, he might have looked dignified. To me, he looked small. Scrolling further, another name appeared: Victoria Bennett. My chest tightened, but only briefly. She had struck her own deal, cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for probation. The woman who once clung to James on a dance floor, smug in her triumph, was now a disgraced witness in his downfall. She had walked into my old life thinking she'd won a prize. Instead, she inherited the wreckage. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the article. The world had wanted blood proof that James had paid for his arrogance, his greed, his betrayals. And now they had it: a prison sentence, a ruined reputation, a once celebrated attorney reduced to a cautionary headline. But for me, the satisfaction wasn't in his punishment. It was in the quiet morning I was living, the steaming mug of coffee in my hand, the sound of the city stirring awake beyond my window, the knowledge that my life now belonged wholly to me. Justice was cold, impersonal, delivered by courts and contracts. My true justice had arrived the moment I walked away. I closed the news tab and turned back to my work. Today I had 3 client calls scheduled: a boutique financial firm restructuring its leadership, a publishing house navigating a merger, and a law office rebuilding after losing senior partners. Each of them trusted me, Elena Taylor, organizational consultant, to guide them through delicate transitions. If someone had told me years ago that this would be my future, I would have laughed. Catherine Elliott was always the wife in the corner, smiling politely, pouring her brilliance into making James look brighter. Elena Taylor was the opposite: visible, confident, direct. I didn't perform for anyone's approval anymore. I no longer worried if my words were too sharp, too bold. I spoke and people listened. Sometimes in quiet moments I thought of Catherine with a kind of tenderness. She had endured, she had learned, and she had eventually walked out. Without her endurance, Elena would never have been possible. But the truth was clear: I had buried that version of myself. The woman who had once been erased had given birth to the woman who now thrived. The phone buzzed. It was Marcus, his secure signal appearing as a coded notification. Justice served, albeit imperfectly. V cut separate deal. J got 5. Terminal 4, 3:30 p.m. if you want to watch her arrival. For a brief moment, I pictured it. Victoria Bennett stepping off a plane in San Diego, the cameras gone, the diamond ring pawned or hidden away, her new life reduced to hushed gossip. A year ago, I might have savored the thought. Today, I simply typed back, "No need." That chapter is closed. It struck me then how profoundly I had changed. The old me might have needed to see Victoria humble James in handcuffs, the empire they built together, collapsing. Elena didn't need it. Elena had clients to meet, proposals to finish, a dinner with friends later that evening. Justice was not revenge. It was freedom from caring about their fate at all. That afternoon, as I prepared for my next video call, a new email popped into my inbox. The sender made me pause. Barrett and Hughes, LLP. The name was familiar, painfully so. They were the very firm James had once dreamed of joining when he plotted his expansion into New York. His fantasy had been to conquer the city through them, to stand among their ranks as proof of his brilliance. Now here was a polite, professional message addressed to Elena Taylor. We are seeking consulting expertise in organizational restructuring following a major leadership transition. Your profile and experience stood out. Would you be available for a meeting next week? I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow, steady laugh. Life had a way of circling back with perfect irony. The firm that had once been part of James's ambition was now extending a hand to not Catherine, not his wife, but Elena. I thought of him in his cell, cut off from the world, and of me sitting in this sunlit apartment, free to choose my path. For a long time, James had believed he defined me. But the truth was inescapable. Now the world no longer even spoke our names in the same sentence. As evening fell, I walked along the promenade, the East River shimmering beneath the lights of Manhattan. The air was crisp, filled with the hum of the city. A year ago, I had been terrified of what life without James might look like. Tonight, I knew it looked like possibility. There's a verse from the Gospel of John that lingers with me. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That was my journey in a single line. The truth had been painful betrayal, erasure, lies. But in embracing it, I found freedom. There's also a proverb that echoes through my steps. What defines us is how well we rise after falling. I had fallen hard, but I rose higher than I ever imagined. As I turned back toward home, my phone buzzed with another client request, another beginning, another chance to live as Elena. And for the first time I realized I didn't just survive James Elliott. I had outlived him in every way that mattered. The soft glow of the Manhattan skyline shimmered across the East River as I leaned against the railing of the promenade. A crisp wind tugged at my hair, carrying with it the smell of autumn leaves and the faint hum of traffic. This was my city, now my life, my freedom. And yet, as I looked back on the long journey that had brought me here, I realized something unexpected. My story was never really about revenge. For so long, I thought disappearing from James was the only way to reclaim myself. And in many ways, it was. Leaving him, leaving San Diego, leaving Catherine Elliott behind, that was my survival. But standing here now, more than a year later, I understood that true freedom did not come from his downfall. It came from something deeper, something harder, the decision to forgive. Not forgiveness as in excusing what he had done, because betrayal, deceit, and cruelty deserve no excuse. Forgiveness instead as a choice not to carry the weight of his sins on my shoulders any longer. For years I let his disregard define me. For months I carried the bitterness like armor. But bitterness corrodes the one who wears it more than the one it's aimed at, and tonight I realized I had set that armor down. There's a Western proverb I once read. What defines us is how well we rise after falling. When James betrayed me, when I discovered the forged mortgage, the hidden accounts, the affair flaunted in public, I felt as though I had fallen into a pit with no way out. But rising wasn't just about leaving. Rising meant choosing not to be chained by anger forever. Rising meant building a life so whole, so authentic, that his shadow could no longer touch me. Forgiveness in this sense wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had buried in silence, my strength, my ambition, my laughter. Forgiveness meant saying, you do not get to own the rest of my days. James's prison sentence was justice. Victoria's public disgrace was justice. But they were cold forms of justice delivered by courts, contracts, and consequences. What I carried in my heart was something warmer, more human. Justice gave me closure. Forgiveness gave me peace. I thought of Catherine Elliott, the woman who once stood silent at law firm dinners, her achievements dismissed as little hobbies. I thought of the emerald gown she wore the night she walked away, the platinum ring she placed on that table. I honored her for her courage, but I no longer felt sorrow for her, because she became me, and in becoming me she proved that survival is not the end of the story. Healing is. There's a reason people are drawn to true revenge stories. They want to see betrayal punished wrongs, made right villains brought low. But my revenge didn't come from James's collapse. It came from refusing to let his actions poison my spirit. It came from forgiving, not for him, but for myself. That is the paradox of revenge. The sweetest form is not destruction, but reconstruction. Not in watching someone fall, but in rising so completely that their fall becomes irrelevant. Forgiveness, then, is not weakness. It is the strongest revenge of all because it turns pain into power without leaving scars on your soul. Sometimes you have to let go of the life you plan to find the life that's waiting for you. I once planned to be the perfect attorney's wife supporting James while quietly dreaming of my own career. That life crumbled, and when it did, I thought everything was over. But here in New York, Elena Taylor lives the life Catherine never could. I advise law firms, publishing houses, and financial companies. I have colleagues who respect me, friends who see me a city that embraces me. I walk into rooms not as someone's shadow, but as my own light. Letting go of James was hard. Letting go of the bitterness was harder. But letting go opened a door to the life that had been waiting all along. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. People think it means letting the other person off the hook. But forgiveness is not about them. It's about setting yourself free. It's about saying, you no longer control my thoughts, my heart, or my future. I don't forgive James because he deserves it. I forgive him because I deserve peace. I forgive Victoria because holding on to anger would only anchor me to a past I have already outgrown. And in that forgiveness, I find myself lighter, freer, stronger. The Bible says in John 8:32, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." My truth was painful, but facing it freed me. Forgiving it freed me even more. If you're listening to this story, if you followed me from the glittering ballroom where my husband danced with another woman to this quiet Brooklyn night, I want to say this. You may not be able to choose what happens to you, but you can choose what to carry forward. Carry the lessons, not the bitterness. Carry the strength, not the shame. Carry the hope, not the fear, because revenge may satisfy for a moment, but forgiveness sustains for a lifetime. The city lights flickered as I turned back toward my apartment. Somewhere in California, James counted the days behind prison walls. Somewhere in San Diego, Victoria tried to piece together a life from the ruins. But here in this moment, none of that defined me. I was no longer Catherine Elliott, the missing wife, the betrayed partner, the silent woman in someone else's story. I was Elena Taylor, whole, free, forgiven, forgiving. And that more than anything was my true revenge.